Hello and welcome to Talk Spooky to Me, the Ghost Story Guys mail show. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestel.
And this is our opportunity to hear from you, our listeners. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I've got over the film I watched at the weekend, and I'm moving on with my life.
Now, I must know, you alluded to this off air, but you wanted to tell me on air. What was the film you watched this weekend?
Under Paris.
I watched that yesterday.
It's hard to know what's right with it. I have to say, it's one of the most annoyingly shit films I've seen in a long time. I'm not sure. The message about it, the underlying message of the film, is one we all agree on. You know, we need to stop massacring species in the oceans for no reason. That is a fine endeavour. However, it is quite possibly one of the stupidest films I've ever watched.
It's not top shelf entertainment, I'll say that. It's no Halloween Jack, but...
Well, no, it's not that bad. It's bad, but it's not that bad.
I'm always on board for a shark movie. This was not perhaps one of the better ones. One of your countrymen made one called Sharkbait, I think, last year that was quite fun. James Nunn is a British director who's done some good direct-to-video action stuff, and Sharkbait was solid. But yeah, I didn't love it. I would say if someone's looking for a fun movie on Netflix that is a palate cleanser, aside from Godzilla Minus One, which is great, is Hitman with Glenn Powell.
Lots of people have been talking about that.
Yeah, I actually managed to catch it in its brief theatrical run a couple weeks ago, and it's on Netflix now, and it's really fun. It's based on a true story about a college lecturer who posed as a hitman for the FBI or for the cops to help them catch people who would try and hire a hitman. And they've made sort of a little romantic, like a very dark romantic comedy out of it. It's pretty solid. So that is my recommendation for you.
And if you want to watch the worst B movie of the year, this is exactly why films like Sharknado aren't considered a B movie, because they think they're making a really crap film. They know what they're trying to achieve. Whereas this, their tongue is nowhere near their cheek. They think they're making a really powerful ecological statement about the world and killer sharks, but they're not. They're making a badly written, unintentional comedy classic.
There you go. 10 years from now, people are going to say, man, Under Paris, what a funny movie, how I love it.
So everybody involved in this film should be under Paris. Put them in the catacombs, see how they cope with it.
Well, I am very excited for this episode because we're going to answer some listener mail, and then after the break, we are going to have a conversation with Jo Hickey-Hall, who is the host of the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. This is a conversation we've been looking forward to for quite some time, and we had a really, really great time talking to Jo. Jo is, she's a super cool person. We'd emailed before, but never actually spoken in person. And of course, she had been on Mysteries and Monsters. Very, very interesting lady. I think you folks are really going to enjoy the conversation. And it ran longer than we anticipated, so patrons will actually get the full conversation, and the public, you fine folks, you'll get an edited down version so we can keep Talk Spooky at a manageable length. But if you'd like to hear the whole conversation, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or sign up to GSG Premium via YouTube or Apple Podcasts. As for me, Paul, this week has been interesting. You know, I'm only bringing this up because, you know, some of the email that we're going to be looking into here has referenced the fact that people appreciate we talk about mental health. Mm-hmm. So I have had, objectively, a really great last couple weeks. I'm
Thanks.
Probably, like, you know, money's still tight, but that's just the nature of doing what we do. But otherwise, everything's going well. You know, the project with Brandon is coming along pretty well. Everything's good. Well, in my personal life, I've got some cool stuff coming up. I'm going to the Goblin Market down in Indiana soon. I'm going back to Victoria for a week for Nick's birthday. I've got tickets to go see a 35mm presentation of JFK at the Review Cinema in Toronto at the beginning of next month. Yeah. Or sorry, no, Natural Born Killers, not Natural.
Oh. So my favorite Stone film, JFK.
I did see a 35 presentation of that last year. It was really cool. But yeah, so a lot of great stuff going on. But man, my anxiety has really made it difficult to enjoy all that shit. It has been a drag. I'm feeling not too bad today, but it's fascinating how your mind will actively work against you to put you into a negative place because that is what is familiar to you. And it has been a real struggle fighting out of that, and I've accomplished consequently like far less than I'd wanted to this week because, of course, we're recording this Thursday. But sometimes it is just, it's like moving through molasses. It is a pain in the ass. Just thought I thought I'd mention that, one, so I get to complain to someone, and two, just in case anyone in our audience is going through the same thing, it is not just you. It is, again, I really do think there's a lot to this notion that, if we've been depressed for a long time, the bad place is comfortable for us. It's not good for us, but we're used to it. And so I think that, I think that it's a real thing. And again, I just thought, well, you know what? After I kind of got to the point where I could have at least some perspective on it, I thought I can mention it on the show. What the hell? So just in case someone else is going through that and they can hear someone saying the same thing, I think it might be helpful.
As always, yes.
Well, now that I've brought the mood down, let's
talk about Under Paris.
Yes, we'll go back to talk about Under Paris.
No. I've said I'm never talking about that film again.
Well, in that case, we better just read some email.
Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs.
We're ready to believe you.
All right, so our first message, we're leading with this because it is a rare thing, Paul. It is a positive comment from Podbean.
I remember it well when I first started.
Yes, Paul and I, this is sort of a private joke between us, that when someone gets on our nerves, we'll say, fuck off back to Podbean. Because by and large, the only comments you ever get on Podbean is a podcast platform, for those of you who don't know. We don't post there. Our show just automatically is picked up by them. It is always the most unhinged shit. It is always the most dissatisfied, angry, sometimes delusional stuff, and you'll get an email. You have a comment from Podbean. And I went, I can't wait to see what phantasmagoria awaits for me at the other end of this link.
Yeah. That's where I got the comment about why was I pretending to be British.
There you go. That is peak Podbean. That is the top of the Podbean mountain.
I really enjoy your show, but why are you pretending to be British?
You've never given them a satisfactory answer, Paul.
People don't speak like that in Britain. Yeah, all right, mate.
Imagine living in that person's head for a moment. Like, what do you think people in Britain sound like?
Good evening. Welcome to Great Britain, the rulers of the world.
They sound like if Kermit the Frog was a butler.
Yes.
All right.
Would you like some tea?
Good God. If someone asked me like that in that voice, I would never drink tea again. And I love
scones?
Tea. Wow, it's getting worse. I'm going to hear that in my dreams.
Would you like a piece of my clotted fudge?
And into the darkness we go. I am leap out the nearest. No, I'm leaping out the nearest window. That's what I'm doing.
Ooh.
So we have a sane comment from Podbean, a lovely comment from Podbean actually. This comes from Count, and Count says, sorry, that was cheap. I got him with that one, guys. I got him good.
Oh, I love the Count.
Deep breath. All right. So the Count says, great episode, guys. Sorry. I'm sorry. I had to see if I could get him again. I did, and I said,
I've crossed oceans of time to email you.
That's right.
1, 2, 3 oceans. Oh.
All right. So, Count, in reality, Count says, and this is referring to our most recent episode, I believe, A Little Cosmic Terror. Count says, great episode, guys. The ending dealing with mental health was so good. As someone who battles anxiety, depression, and attempted to end the journey, removing the stigma saves lives. Sharing and normalizing that it is okay to ask for help is so important. Thank you guys for taking time to address mental health. And Count, thank you for taking the time to write that. We really appreciate it. All kidding aside, we really do appreciate it. We're really grateful that you're still here with us.
Always keep fighting. Never give up.
Hell yes.
Next, Shari says, hi lads, I've sent you a picture of the stairs to the attic. They're dusty with cobwebs, but not scary. I do have a story to share, but it's not exactly a ghost story, more of a mystery really. When I was 9, my grandmother bought an oval mirror for my bedroom at an auction, and the frame was painted gold. It hung in my bedroom for years. Fast forward 30 years on. I was going through a furniture stripping phase, and I decided to take the garish gold paint off the mirror and repaint it. During this process, the mirror glass came out and broke into 2 pieces. Where the mirror glass had been was an old-fashioned pastel portrait of a girl from the turn of the 19th century. I was gobsmacked. This little girl had been on the other side of the mirror glass for who knew how long. Well, at least 30 years that I had had the mirror. I looked for clues as to who it could be or where she had come from and could find nothing. I brought it to my grandmother, who had purchased it at the auction, and she was astonished. She told me that the girl, who would have been the same age as her at the time, must have been from a wealthy family, as she wore a gold locket, and children didn't wear jewellery as a rule in those days. The little girl stood in front of some large iron gates, and the whole background was dark and sombre. After looking at the picture for a few days, it occurred to me that it was a cemetery. Then the penny dropped. This was a memorial portrait of a child that had died. The Victorians took photographs of dead children for remembrance, but this was a pastel portrait. But why was it behind the mirror? I took the frame and portrait to a framing shop and the glass to replace it, as I didn't want the pastel to smudge. I felt like I was responsible for caring for this portrait. And oh yes, she completely creeped me out, but she and I had been together for a long time. My daughter, then 14, named her Simone, and she hung in the living room for the next few years. Later, when I moved, my daughter asked to keep Simone, and she now hangs in her living room to this day. So no ghosts as far as I know, but a bit of a mystery, and a freaky coincidence. Thanks for all you dudes do. Those mental health messages are so important. Carry on, gents. Sherry.
And Sherry has included a photo of this picture, and I understand nothing creepy has happened, Sherry, but it's a creepy. If that turned up underneath a mirror, I would 100% expect to have that person appear in my dreams.
Yeah. I suspect that, as Sherry says, I mean, these are, as she mentions in there, some of the things that Victorians did were quite peculiar, as she refers to, like having pictures of departed children taken in situ, in hospital, in coffins, or sometimes gaily displayed in some kind of floral setting before they were buried. Or they would have sort of remembrance lockets and brooches and portraits painted of basically saying, here's this beautiful child, unfortunately they're dead. So there would be an indication in the portrait that they had passed on, as is this one. But I suspect that somebody really liked the frame, but didn't know the child, and probably just thought, it's a shame to waste it, I'll just put a mirror in it.
Oh, okay.
I would imagine, because otherwise you'd just take the whole thing out and just reframe it, wouldn't you?
It seems odd. I don't think there's anything sinister to it. It just seems weird. It has shades of like buying a picture frame and just leaving the stock photo in it. You know, that's my cousin Larry. Don't ask me any further questions. I know people. I have friends.
Ironically, saying that, several years ago, some friends bought me and my partner at the time a collection of picture frames, and it had got these pictures of like sock monkeys in them, right? And I thought they were brilliant. I thought they were hilarious. And so and I thought, this is what they bought us, right? Like these 3 small squares with a comedy sock monkey in each one. And I thought, yeah, these are cool. And then about 4 years later, they came back and they went, why have you still got the display pictures in? And they weren't a real thing. It was just a display picture. I don't know what happened to them monkeys. I like them monkeys. I don't know where they are anymore.
Learning lots of stuff about Paul tonight. Hates the French, loves sock monkeys. Loves the Count.
It's because I'm getting ready for that semi-final showdown.
Of course. Got to prepare.
I do love a good mystery, though, going back to Sherry's thing. It's amazing. It's like the other week where that couple were renovating their bathroom and they found a 14th century drain under the floor.
Really?
In Lincoln, yeah.
How are they able to date it?
Because of the design.
Oh, okay.
It was a medieval, I think it's made out of, I'm not sure, was it made out of, I can't remember. There was a big article about it, and it had basically just been covered up with floorboards and stuff. And it was this beautiful old ornate drain. It was amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Man, it does not happen over here. I might find like an old bottle of beer from 1932 or something, but that's as close as we get. This one comes from Brody. Brody says, I've been patiently waiting for a UFO episode. It's either the most existentially terrifying stuff ever or super wacky. Yep, that is not inaccurate, Brody. And I imagine we'll be doing an episode like that again in future. It's been quite popular. It was a lot of fun doing it because it's a subject I don't know a ton about, and I get to pick Paul's brain, which is always fun. Although we do have a comment from another patron who had a theory about Shag Harbor.
Oh, did they now?
They did.
I'll be the judge of that.
Devin writes, I wholeheartedly agree that our attitudes towards science and discovery are approaching the dedication of cultish proportions. As much as I have a hard time accepting that UFO sightings are aliens outright, I have no doubt they exist. There are accounts of F-18 pilots that used to fly at certain altitudes at night and use their afterburners to outright deceive UFO searchers. To those people, those F-18s zipping around just look like lights doing wild shit in the desert. Those sightings were reported as UFOs. They don't know that our jets literally defy the laws of physics sometimes. They don't need to. Those people wholeheartedly saw a UFO. They couldn't identify it, therefore it is indeed a UFO. Even the video of the F-18 pilots watching that orb jump in and out of the water was probably man-made. If you're DARPA and you have access to $1 billion of uber-classified research, and you need an impartial test subject, well, a section of F-18s that have no idea that you're testing some trippy new intel collection tech would be a really good control group. But, as true as those examples are, there's no doubt in my mind aliens exist and stuff. If anything, we're like a National Geographic safari to them. And Devin goes on to say, I literally wrote this right before the Shag Harbor conversation. That's a perfect example. Cruise missiles weren't a popularized missile system in the 60s. If you're going to research a cruise missile for, say, a submarine, and you want to be sure it can travel through water, testing it on a military audience that has no idea what it is vulnerable to makes sense. So what are your thoughts on that, Paul?
No.
Okay.
Well, yes, of course. There will always be misidentified technological advances that are man-made that are misidentified. That is, that's a matter of fact. Most people were not aware they were seeing the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter when they reported them as UFOs, and they were clearly sightings. So yes, and one would expect members of the military to try and pull the wool over the eyes of certain people and have some jolly japes with certain people. But, as with anything, it only takes one of them not to be that for it to be something else. And like I say, yes, there will always be things. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like people talk about the Tic Tac video and they talk about, oh, well, you never know. As though the Tic Tac video happened in 2017 when it's from 2003. People go, oh, well, it's probably China or Russia. I mean, having seen, like the other comment talks about cruise missiles, obviously watching some of the conflicts over the years, I've seen a missile fly down the street of Baghdad and then turn left because they were so controllable. And that was
right.
Shown over here on the British news, showing us these missiles that could fly in a straight line and then change direction. Like, what?
I had no idea.
So, and that's nearly 20 years ago. Probably is 20 years ago. So we it's not like technology has suddenly advanced to a level. This stuff has been going on, and we know, especially in the States, with some of the industrial militarized complex, as they were warning about in the 50s, certainly has a great deal of power. And I would imagine there are certain shadowy organizations at work in most Western democracies on a similar level, certainly not of the financial muscle, perhaps as some of the American companies like Bigelow and the like. But yes, there will always be shadowy people at play on top of everything else. So who's to say? But clearly over the years, people have I mean, I'm trying to remember what it was. There was a very famous incident where the Americans denied for years that they got this particular type of plane, and then it crashed in Russian territory.
Was that the U-2?
Yeah, yes, that's it. Yeah, the U-2. So, once again, that was flying at a certain height that people were mistaking it AWAC planes were misidentified over the years, you know, because you're like, what the hell? Why is there a plane carrying a giant mushroom? What's going on here? Is it a mushroom? Or is it a mushroom eating a plane? What is going on, Brennan?
Devin, you're going to have to explain that one to us. But
great thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. Appreciate it as always. Devin is a valued member of our Patreon community.
Next, Alicia writes, "Hi all, love the pod. I told a story a while back, but I've got another. About a ghost cat and an odd series of events. Our beloved family cat, Muridan, passed away suddenly from heart failure back in 2022. Oh. It was the first time I'd experienced or been with a pet or anything close to me passing, and I think it stuck with me. Murray loved to sleep at the foot of the bed, and call it what you like, but sometimes I feel him jump onto the bed and curl up at my feet. Sometimes I think it was him that sent us our youngest daughter, as less than a week after he passed, I discovered I was pregnant. He was a very missed snuggle buddy. I love the pod. All the best to Brennan and Paul. And also, Brennan, if you're still in the London, Ontario this summer, my husband and I would love to take you to dinner. Sorry, Paul, but I understand there's an entire ocean in between us."
Well, Alicia, my lease runs until October at the very least, so I'm not going anywhere. And I would be honored to have dinner with you and your husband. So shoot me an email at ghoststoryguys@gmail.com and we will figure it out. And I'm so sorry to hear about Muridan, but I do love that he's come back for a visit. That seems very comforting.
Absolutely. And in the place where you would remember him the most.
Exactly that. It's reassuring to think that we will have a chance to renew those connections in the life after this one. All right. Well, we had more email, but as I mentioned, our conversation with Jo ran long. So we're going to draw a line under it there. But if you'd like to send us a message, we would love to share it on an upcoming Talk Spooky show. Ghoststoryguys@gmail.com is the place to send it. But for now, we are going to take a quick ad break and come back with Jo Hickey-Hall of the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. Welcome back. As we said before the break, we have a very special guest on this episode. We are joined by the host of one of our favorite shows, both Paul and I, one of our favorite shows. It is the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, and she is Jo Hickey-Hall. Jo, welcome to the Ghost Story Guys.
Thank you very much. It's a lovely introduction. And yeah, it's really great to be with you both.
We've been talking about this, Paul and I, for a while, because your show is really kind of important for me in a lot of ways, because on this show, going right back to episode 27, which would have been 2018, I think, I have had a bit of a contentious relationship with our friends. Our subtle friends, our good folk friends, because I was incautious with my speech and I was stupid and I was disrespectful. And because when I got into the show, I was just stupid. I was a very dumb 34-year-old man. And now I am a slightly less dumb 41-year-old man. And I have realized the error of my ways. But doing that and being incautious in my speech in that way really kicked us in the butt. We had a lot of technical issues on that episode, and going forward, whenever that subject came up, I would also be stupid, and the same thing would happen. So I developed a bit of a phobia around the subject, if I'm honest. And really, it wasn't until I started listening to your show, sort of understanding the good folk as a concept and as a culture, not just a boogeyman, that I was able to kind of let that go. And just by that point, I was treating it with respect, but there was also less fear.
Yeah. No, it's very true. I mean, I don't know if you heard the episode relating to the Dark Rider on Glastonbury Tour.
Yes.
But, I mean, that was a major edit, because throughout that entire conversation, every time my guest went to talk about what he looked like, we just cut. And I mean, I've never experienced that much before. It was really strong. And that particular kind of energy relating to that being Gwyn ap Nuith, it goes hand in hand with these sorts of issues. But yeah, it was just, in the end, we were just like, are we going to get through this? And it's not like, I mean, I always check that it feels right, because if I ever felt like, and I have had a no before about something and I've listened, but I wasn't getting a no, but we were certainly being, made aware that there was a very real presence. And you're left in no uncertain terms as to what's going on sometimes, but that is the nature, isn't it?
It sure is. And folks, if you haven't listened to Joe's show, which you absolutely should do, the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast is exactly that. In fact, Joe, you'd probably give a better description of it than I could. Why don't you tell us, for the folks who don't know, just quickly describe what it is that you do.
It's basically the whole kind of emphasis of the show is to just talk to people about their own experiences so that we get to hear them in their own words. I absolutely love the folklore, and I love reading about old encounters as well, collected encounters. And for me, having had my own experiences, talking about my own experience for the first time was a really, really big thing to get my head around. It felt huge. It took a long time before I decided that I could talk about it. So I know how important it is to people to feel okay about sharing. And for some people, they decide never to, but they still want to hear other people's stories because it helps them to realize that they're not alone. It's often surprising to people how many stories there are out there. I mean, there are just so many people. Every single person that's watching your show now or listening to your show will know somebody that's seen a fairy. I believe that to be true, or had some kind of encounter with the fae. If you look to kind of older generations in the family too, it wasn't seen as okay to talk about it. So, it's still one of the last taboos. So I think this space of the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast is just really to hear from people like you and I, just people that you might pass in the supermarket, or it might be brought to the attention that someone you've known for decades has had this incredible experience and they've never told you. Because that's what people say when they come on the show, that oftentimes I'm the first person they've spoken to about it, which is an honor. But it's also really sad that they had something so special that they couldn't actually share with loved ones close around them. So yeah, that's kind of how it is. But I feel like it's changing. Do you think that's changing? I feel like there's something changing there and people feel more able to talk about it. But maybe that's just because I'm in this world.
Do you think, Joe, it's because not only that we've got this generational taboo about this particular subject and almost as if uttering their name brings them to you come to their attention, as it were, that also, as we've said when we spoke previously and some of the conversations we've had, do you think it's also that there's this kind of situation when we talk about the fae that for a lot of people, they just think, well, this can't possibly be real. I can't be experiencing this because these creatures can't exist, surely.
Yeah, I think that's got a lot to do with it. They will, I mean, it's really interesting because sometimes people come on and they talk about witnessing these beings with another person, and that other person will just, it hits what we call the boggle threshold, which they just cannot compute it. So they therefore will decide that, no, that didn't happen, or no, I don't want to talk about it. And whereas the person that's coming and describing it to me is describing it as one of the most incredible experiences of their lives, that it meant so much to them. And as we know, when you listen to these stories, shifts tend to happen afterwards for them. So it's usually a kind of pivotal point in their lives. But that's all lost on the person that just closes down and just refuses to accept that they have seen with their own eyes something that completely blows their mind. I mean, you can't blame them for responding like that because, as you say, they're of the belief that this cannot be true, and therefore they're not going to look at it, because if they do, then they're going to have to start questioning themselves about, what else don't they know about the world, and what does it say about, life itself, and these really big questions. And I think that for a lot of people, when they have these experiences, they're opening to the divine in some way, and not only opening to the the otherworldly beings and this divine nature in the world, but also their own inner, the divine within them. And when you do that, you really can't look away again. For most people, this is what I feel. If you're open to it, you can't pretend anymore. And you have to kind of face some truths in your life, and you grow as a result. So I think that kind of explains a lot of why there are transitions afterwards, because our eyes are open. We expand as human beings, and we grow. And I think that's really important, which is why it is important to talk about things that are difficult in all sorts of senses, not just about fairies, but all sorts of things. We've got to continue to develop and grow and expand. And it does have a bearing on how we treat nature too. These beings, they're not always, these encounters don't always take place in forests. Sometimes they're in the home, and there's lots of thoughts around why that might happen. But certainly they do have connections with places that are less trodden by human feet. Some might say, well, perhaps that's to do with the mycelium. Maybe it's just to do with, the age of some of the trees, that you have these elementals that attach to plants and trees and flowers. So there's that kind of theosophical viewpoint for understanding these beings. But whichever way you look at it, they do seem to have a deep connection with nature, as did we at a point in time. And, we've lost a lot of that, and we are starting to return to that. And so it's interesting that as we're returning to that realization of what we've lost in nature, we're also beginning to face, these realities, the reality that these beings do exist. It feels very normal for me to talk about it now, but I know that it just sounds a bit too far-fetched for a lot of people.
I'm really curious if you would share with us your experience that put you on this road.
So seeing the small green man, do you mean, or just generally?
Both would be great.
Yeah.
Your first visual experience would be grand.
Yeah,
but,
that was definitely the most vivid, and it was kind of eyes open, just a man appearing right there, looking right back at me while I was with my husband in 2007. And I've kind of spoken about this quite a few times now, so it's also on my podcast as well. But yeah, just, being at a beauty spot, and it was at the point where we were falling in love, I think. So I always think that had a big bearing on this. And it was sunset, the sun was setting. It was kind of like a twilighty time, and it was in a sacred location, and it was kind of close to the ocean. So kind of lots of liminal effects there. I can't actually remember, and I really wish I'd written down the date. I didn't write down the date. It would have been really good to know the date that happened, but it was sometime in the warmer months of 2007. As we were there together, I turned and saw, this. I had an impression, when you have an impression that someone's watching you, and I turned and saw him, and he was just looking right at me, and it looked as if he was walking. It looked as if he was kind of walking across further up from where we were sitting, and was just curiously watching us. And he was looking right into my eyes, and he was probably, I'm going to say, it's difficult to say how far away, because he was slightly up a slope, but he was either in front of or behind a fallen log. So there was this fallen tree there, and I felt instinctively like he had something to do with that tree, potentially. It turned out afterwards, and so yeah, we kind of held each other's gaze. I'm just, looking at him, and I guess at some point of me trying to compute what am I looking at here? Am I actually seeing what I'm seeing here? But yeah, clear as day, as you would a person. It's not like he was translucent or he was this vivid being about 3 foot tall or something. and just the very, very kind of bright eyes, but I can't remember what colour his eyes were. But most of all, his lined face, which was just so ancient, just line upon line upon line, just not any clear skin, just ancient lines, like leather, that kind of tanned leather in the sun. And I think he was wearing a hat. He was wearing a hat, but I cannot remember what his hat was like. I just cannot remember that. But there's a kind of likeness that my husband drew for the podcast, years later. He wasn't exactly what I saw, but what my husband, I felt, did capture from my description was his kind of openness of his face, because he did have a round, open, friendly face, not smiling, but not scowling either, just interested and curious. And the above all, the message, or the kind of, people talk about sort of telepathic messages, don't they? I just had this real sense. The real sense I got from it was that he wanted me to see him. I feel that really strongly.
Oh, okay.
I really feel that was what I walked away with. And then when we got up to leave, it had got really dark by the time we left, and I didn't tell my husband at the time. I just clocked this, had this experience, and I kept it to myself. And when we got up to leave, there was something walking in the long grass to our left, and we couldn't see anything there. And my husband got really spooked, because he gets spooked super easily. And so he started to kind of fasten his pace, and I kind of fastened quicken mine as well. But then the footsteps in the grass picked the pace up as well. And so they had this really ridiculous situation where then my husband started going faster, and I was then kind of going faster. And it was kind of just keeping pace. And then he just started running. And I thought it was funny. I was laughing because I thought it was funny, because I did realise that I realised that that's what was happening, that it was this kind of cheeky fairy presence. And it wasn't frightening at all. And it actually wasn't, weirdly, it wasn't even shocking. It wasn't shocking. And I'm not, years before that, when I used to go to, if you like, sort of new agey type spiritual groups in Jersey, where I was learning things like seeing auras and healing and Bach flower remedies and crystals and astrology and meditation and astral travel and all these kind of things. The teacher had told us that she'd once seen a fairy, and I just could not get my head around that. And I just thought that was just silly. And so, if somebody had asked me, what would you do if you'd seen a fairy? Just the thought of that would never have entered my head. I'm not the kind of person that had been into fairies at all. The only connection I'd ever had with that sort of idea, that sort of world, is that my dad is Irish. He's no longer with us. Unfortunately, he died just before we moved to Bristol about 10 years ago. But as a child, he would tell me these stories of growing up in rural Ireland, just outside Cork City. And he would tell them as if, imagining this child who would kind of go off for playing with their friends and then lose track and get lost and encounter this sacred site, and the knowledge that they should beware of the fairies, but they'd kind of sit down in a circle of a darker shade of grass, and then they would be enchanted in some way and they would meet the fairies. That was my only kind of introduction to fairies, but I was never a child that sort of dressed as fairies. Or I loved nursery rhymes and I loved Enid Blyton, but I never, kind of growing up and being interested in all of this sort of, I was always interested in the paranormal, always interested in mysteries of any kind, but never really fairies. So this was a big shock, as in once it had happened. But at the time, it didn't feel like a shock. It actually kind of felt like, again, this kind of sense of familiarity. But afterwards, I told a friend of mine who couldn't really get her head around it, which was fine. And then the only other person I plucked up the courage to tell was a guy who worked in, it was his antique shop. And I knew that he was a wise man, but I didn't really know him. But anyway, I plucked up the courage to tell him, and it turned out that other people had seen something, and I still don't know to this day what. I never got to ask him because he also passed on, sadly. But he told me that I wasn't the only one to have seen something there. So subsequently, a few years ago, and this was an episode also on the podcast, I went back to that place because the friend that couldn't bring herself to believe me at the time, she said at the time, she's very lovely and she's a really good friend, but she said, I think it's lovely that you think you saw what you saw, but I'm really sorry, I just can't believe it.
Yikes.
But that's been my stance previously. I couldn't believe that woman when she said she'd seen a fairy, and yet I was prepared to believe everything else. But actually, she was the one that called me when I first moved to Bristol and was so excited. And she said, oh, you'll never guess what, this so-and-so, this person that she knew, a woman that she knew, had seen something that sounded very similar to me in that same place. And so a few years ago, I went back and I met this woman and I interviewed her. And honestly, what she saw just sounds like the same being, not just the same type of being, but the same being within like a few meters of where I saw this being. So it seems to me that it's something to do with that location. It was a bit of a revelation for me to find out that, I wasn't the only one. And because one train of thought with this is that, it's it's an internal thing. And, maybe you read a Froude book once and you had this in your head. And, these are acceptable things to look at as possibilities. But people will say, you kind of saw something or experienced something and you conjured up what your mind told you that you'd see because of it pulled some information from somewhere. And it's a valid theory to look at. But I never really kind of was quite sure about that. And then when I met this woman and she said she'd seen the same, what seems like the same being in the same place, then that leads me to think, well, then it's not in me and it's not in her, it's external to both of us, unless for some reason, and it was years apart when she saw him and when I saw him, unless for some reason we both had the same, vision at that point. But it seems more likely to me that there's something external and that he somehow is connected to that place. But I would never divulge that location. There are plenty of Egypts in the world, as we all know, and I don't want to for these places to be destroyed or for these beings to be disrespected or hunted out or anything like that in any way, because you just don't know what people are capable of. Well, we can see what people are capable of, and that's why I don't.
Yes.
That's why.
Do you not think that just encapsulates the whole conversation, though, in regards to the Fae, Joe? Like you say, everything you were learning and talking about in Jersey, and would be to some people absurd as the idea of talking about the Fae, and therefore, when we deal with Fortean subjects, it's amazing how often you will have people who deal with fantastical phenomena, and there seems to be a line that whatever phenomenon they deal with or are excited about, that a certain experience, if it goes past their, as you said earlier on, the boggle threshold for them, they simply can't accept it, even though it is what they deal with. And I find that a fascinating aspect, that when we deal with fantastical ideas, some people just only want to go so far, Joe, as if they're frightened of passing by that, because then they seem to be afraid of losing control of what they think it is, because eventually they can't explain things away as easily.
Yeah, it's a process, isn't it? I mean, I definitely have my own boggle thresholds as well. I know, sometimes when I hear certain, and it's very difficult to know whether you're just being careful and instinctive, or whether you've come up against something. And sometimes that can shift. And I should say, by the way, that the term, the boggle threshold, was termed, it's not my term, it's Renee Hayes, who was a researcher. I think she was an anthropologist. I might be wrong on that. It was her that offered that we all have, it depends on what our experiences have been, what our upbringing is, our belief system, fears, and but definitely experiences. And just the kind of the openness with which our home environment, how we grow up and what that's like, whether it's to do with fairies or not, just a kind of sense of open-mindedness that you're brought up with, that, well, these are things that we don't know but could be possible. Or if you're brought up to believe that, no, it's very black and white, it's either this, because you can see it, feel it, touch it, smell it, or it's not. Close the book, end of story. And oh God, even just saying that just makes me shudder, because we see a lot of that in the world, and I think that that's kind of got a lot to answer for. I was lucky enough to be able to study with Professor Ronald Hutton, who was at Bristol, which is why I came to Bristol. And I was going to look at, landscape and ritual. And it was actually Ronald Hutton that put me on to looking at fairies. Now, he didn't know. He suggested, because it was an area of interest for him as well, medieval Irish Sidhe, fairies. He didn't know anything about my experience. I thought about it and I thought, yeah, that would be really interesting, because my dad had just passed just a month before I came to Bristol. So it was kind of a way of me reconnecting with my dad as well. So just realizing there another link with fairies and, people that have passed on, because had it not been for Dad passing on, it may well have been that I may not have felt the need to go down that, or felt the pull to go down that avenue, but it felt really right to me. And so as a result of that, I joined the Folklore Society. Doing what I'm doing now with the podcast, it's never ever been a plan. It's just been a series of sort of breadcrumb paths where it's felt like, okay, yeah, this feels good. I feel like I'm being led this way, and actually it feels good to go this way. And all of a sudden I'm doing it, and then something else happens. I meet somebody, and then this happens, and then this happens, and it's kind of leading to where I am now. And I kind of feel like it will probably continue like this too. I'm only ever doing the things that feel right to me at this time. And I guess it's the same with the podcast too, is that right now this feels really right to be doing this. And I think most of all, I could say, because of the amazing guests that come on the podcast and what I'm learning from them, and the beautiful community that I have on Patreon. They're just such wonderful people, and they're so warm and they're supportive. And I'm learning so much from that. We learn from each other as a community, and that is so important at this time that we're going through in the world, to feel like you've got people that you really resonate with, and that you feel like you're gathering and doing and talking about things that are meaningful to you, and that feel like that help you through this time, and that are important, whatever it is. Like anything else, just gathering together with people at this time, that whatever it is you're interested in, you can look at that together and do something that kind of helps each other in some way, and I guess maybe hopefully helps the world in some way as well. I just think that any kind of expansion of understanding of any kind can help the world. But yeah, people might find the podcast and then have a new sense of things, and that's also really cool.
Well, as I say, that's certainly what happened to me. And folks, I think you should seek the show out as well. Again, if you're not listening to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, now is the time to get started. Jo, thank you so much for spending all this time with us. Where can everyone find you online?
The podcast is on all of the apps like Spotify and Apple, and then all the rest of them. I've also got a channel on YouTube now, and I'm doing it all by myself, which is why everything is kind of just a bit slow going, really. because I'm also writing a book, as if I wasn't sort of cramming it in enough. So
very exciting though, Jo.
It is, yeah, no, it is. It really, actually, I really am enjoying when I'm kind of carving out that space. I am really enjoying the writing. But so yeah, YouTube is also a good place, and I will try and endeavour to get all the episodes up there one by one. And then, of course, I have the Patreon group too, which we kind of meet every month, and we do Zoom chats every month, and then we do a quiet meditation. Then we have all sorts of other events, plus the bonus, the full length episodes, and then bonuses in between. So we kind of get to talk over stuff and exchange information. And they're a really lovely bunch of people. There is a Facebook group for the podcast and project. It's called Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast and Project. Where else am I? I am on Instagram as well. Yeah, and I'm rubbish on Twitter. I apologise for anyone that's tried to follow me on Twitter. I'm just not. I am.
Everyone's rubbish on Twitter now, so you're safe.
Okay.
Yeah, Twitter is a horror show. I went back. I don't know why, because it's worse now than it ever was before. But there's a couple writers whose work I admire who are still on there, so I'll periodically check back. But
I'm
you're
6
safe.
months clean.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 6 months since I deleted my Twitter account.
Yeah, I can understand why it is tough going. But like you say, there's some really cool stuff. I mean, someone sent me some really interesting links actually yesterday, and that I'd completely missed. So yeah, there is a lot of really cool stuff happening there. Of course, people can write to me. I have a website, scarletofthefae.com, Scarlet of the Fae. So that's Scarlet with 2 T's and Fae, FAE.com. And they can, people can write to me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really lovely. It's really nice to see you both, and nice to meet you face to face for the first time, Brennan. Well, at least over Tinternet. But yeah, it's really nice to be with you. And when I was saying before, when I got over this, when I finished the book, she says with a big sigh, it would be lovely to have you both on and have a chat.
It'd be a pleasure. We'd be delighted.
Great. Thank you.
Count us in. All right. Our guest has been Jo Hickey-Hall, host of the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast.
Woo.
Jo, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Big thanks to Jo for hanging out with us for much longer than we had originally told her. We told her it'd be about 45 minutes, and it was most assuredly not that. So many thanks to Jo for hanging out.
Yes, we've released her loved ones back into her care now. And they'll all be very happy.
That is one hostage returned. Man, good to know. Good to know. But yes, don't forget to check out the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. We both listen to it, and we think you will enjoy it too. Paul, my friend, where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all podcast platforms and social media sites.
Fabulous. I'm on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd, all as Largely the Truth. You can find the Ghost Story Guys on Facebook and Instagram. We're on Instagram as The Ghost Story Guys. And you can find my other podcast, Weird Together, where Dr. Joseph Como and I break down the sociology behind the latest and greatest in independent horror films. Everywhere fine podcasts live. As always, we want to end Talk Spooky with a song. This time around, we are pleased to present the latest single from our friends at Genki Genki Panic, Chattanooga, Tennessee's best surf rock band. That song is Crypt Walk. If you like what you hear, you can find more from Genki Genki Panic on their Bandcamp page, which is, of course, genkigenkipanic.bandcamp.com. And if you're not sure how to spell that, you can check out the show notes in your podcatcher or at ghoststoryguys.com. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. We will see you next week for episode 191. And until then, we will leave you with Genki Genki Panic and Crypt Walk.